I chased after Logan for 3 years and became his unofficial mistress. The entire upper class said I sold my body for money. When the news of his engagement broke, I packed my bags, planning to leave quietly before his wedding. But the moment I pushed the door open, he barged in, dared to take one step? I won't let you leave me. Serafina stood beside the mogul, Logan, like a priceless ornament. For 3 years, she had perfectly played the part of a woman who only loved money, enduring the disdain of everyone around her, including Logan himself. The world was convinced she was after the family's wealth, and she let that misconception serve as her solid excuse to stay. All she truly craved was the resemblance in the corner of Logan's eye to her deceased first love, Caleb. Tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Serafina completely shifted her gaze from the substitute, focusing entirely on the upcoming exhibit, the only, unreleased, limited edition vinyl record by the late musical genius, Caleb. This was the one and only time in 3 years she had acted for herself, for the sake of that persistent, unreleased longing. Next up, lot number 47. The record was brought out, glowing with a somber sheen under the crystal chandelier, as if carrying Caleb's unfinished talent and Serafina's entire catalog of regrets. Starting bid, 800,000. Serafina raised her paddle swiftly and cleanly. As the price climbed, she gritted her teeth, her fingers trembling slightly from extreme tension. Every increase chipped away at the entire savings she had accumulated over 3 years. She was going all in, refusing to taint this pure memory with any of Logan's financial assistance. 1.7 million. Her voice was husky, carrying a hint of desperation. This was her absolute limit. 2 million. A mocking, crisp, and jarring voice cut through the air. Logan's cousin, Petra, a socialite who always saw Serafina as an eyesore, proudly held up her number, her eyes full of provocation and malice. She was clearly not here for the art, she was here to ensure Serafina would fail to obtain it. Serafina's heart plummeted. Reason told her she was already over budget, but she absolutely could not let the record fall into the hands of someone who would trample on it. She turned, abandoning all her self-respect, and quickly walked toward a neighboring playboy, Devin, with whom she had previous dealings. She lowered her voice, the urgency in her tone desperate. Devin, please, help me bid for it. I'll pay you back no matter the cost, please trust me. Devin, with his usual flippant smile, raised his bidding paddle for her. Sitting in his private box, Logan witnessed the entire exchange. He saw the fervor in Serafina's eyes for that record, a passion 100 times greater than when she looked at him. He saw her desperation, her willingness to plead with Devin, yet her refusal to ask for help from him, her sugar daddy. This blatant disregard and distance ignited his fury. Logan didn't stand up. He merely tilted his head slightly, giving his assistant, Gideon, an intensely cold look. Gideon understood. He picked up the paddle from Logan's table, his voice steady and powerful, cutting through the din of the entire room. 5 million. The room erupted in gasps. A staggering price that crushed all competitors, including Serafina's last shred of hope. The astonished auctioneer brought down the gavel. The record was sold. Logan took the record box from Gideon's hand, his gaze finally landing on Serafina. There was no pity or affection in his eyes, only a supreme, cold cruelty that suggested punishment. He didn't hand the record to her. Instead, he turned and walked toward Petra. This record is yours. Logan's tone was flat, yet it sounded like a public declaration. Petra was ecstatic, immediately understanding this was Logan's public humiliation and warning to Serafina. She hugged the box triumphantly, shooting Serafina a look of victory. Serafina stood frozen in place, all her blood instantly congealing. 5 million. He bought her most cherished possession at an exorbitant price, only to hand it over to her nemesis. This degradation was a final pronouncement of her identity as the money-loving substitute. She clenched her fists tightly, her nails almost piercing her palms. She understood that her role was the greedy mistress, she had no right to be angry. She took a deep breath, suppressing all the pain and despair in her eyes, and forced a smile that looked worse than a cry. She gave Logan a small bow. Then, she turned and, under Logan's icy stare, left the suffocating venue. The moment she stepped out of the hall, Serafina's eyes completely chilled. No matter the cost, she would get it back. She absolutely could not let Caleb's last remaining sound become the final regret of her 3-year price. Less than 24 hours after the auction, Serafina arrived alone at Petra's private club. A decadent and flashy party was underway here. Loud electronic music, mixed with the smell of alcohol and tobacco, assaulted every sense. She immediately zeroed in on the most dazzling person in the crowd, Petra. Petra was surrounded by sycophants like a queen, and the record box that Logan had bought at a sky-high price was carelessly tossed on the corner of a coffee table, like an abandoned piece of junk. She walked up to Petra, completely shedding the high and mighty mask of the society mistress. Her voice, humble and raspy, was something even she hadn't realized. "Miss Petra, I'm begging you. Sell it to me. Whatever price you name, I'll pay any price." Petra leaned lazily on the sofa. She picked up a stemmed glass of brightly colored, strong liquor and handed it to Serafina. She looked down at Serafina, her eyes full of arrogance and contempt. "You want to buy it? First, rip off that pretense of virtue you have to fake for money." Petra sneered, pointing at the glass. "Drink it all, and I'll listen to you." Serafina's gaze only paused on the liquor for a second. It was Caleb's last remaining sound. For it, she would drink poison. She took the glass without hesitation, tilted her head back, and downed the spicy, searing liquid in one gulp. The alcohol scorched her throat. Tears almost forced their way out of her eyes, but she maintained that compliant smile she had worn as a facade for years. The time that followed felt like being in hell. Amid the jeers of Petra and the surrounding playboys, Serafina was forced to drink glass after glass, listening to the most cutting insults. They publicly mocked her, treating her as a party prop. "You'll do anything for money. How far will you go for this crappy record? A mistress who couldn't even keep Logan's favor, yet she dreams of owning a piece of art." The alcohol and humiliation washed over her in waves. Serafina's consciousness began to blur, but her eyes never left that coffee table. Like a tethered puppet, she clung to her last bit of sobriety only for the sake of Caleb's voice. Petra finally grew bored. She picked up the record box and slowly opened it, looking into Serafina's eyes, which were hazy from alcohol but filled with desperation and plea. "You like it, don't you? Then I'll make sure you remember it forever." A malicious grin spread across Petra's face. She used both hands and, with force, snapped the priceless, limited edition vinyl record in half. Crack! The crisp, sharp, heartbreaking sound of the break was clearly audible even over the loud music. Serafina's mind exploded. 3 years of patience and pretense, all her lingering attachment to the substitute, all her longing for Caleb, transformed into ultimate fury and destruction at this moment. Her reason completely fractured. "You!" She abruptly raised her hand and, with all her strength, viciously slapped Petra across the face. Screams, curses, and the sound of breaking glasses instantly filled the entire private room. Petra clutched her face, crying hysterically. And the people around immediately surrounded Serafina, accusing her in a flurry of voices. "She's drunk and crazy. She came to steal and assault someone. She's lost it." Serafina completely lost her balance. Her legs gave way, and she collapsed heavily onto the floor. She ignored the accusations and the noise. In her world, only the broken, black fragments of the record remained. She stretched out a trembling hand, ignoring the spilled alcohol and stains, and clung to her last shred of consciousness, picking up the record shards piece by piece, fiercely guarding them in her arms. The next second, she finally couldn't hold on anymore. Her vision went black, and she completely collapsed on the floor. But even in her unconscious state, her arms remained tightly wrapped around the pile of useless fragments. Just as chaos reigned, the door to the private room was violently pushed open. Logan's severe figure stood in the boundary of light and shadow. He immediately saw Serafina kneeling on the floor, clutching the fragments, and Petra, surrounded by people, her face flushed red. "Logan! Look at her!" Petra cried, rushing to him and pointing at Serafina. "She's insane. She came to steal my stuff and hit me. Throw her out." Logan ignored Petra's distorted, tearful accusations and simply walked forward. He bent down, carefully retrieved the record fragments from Serafina's arms, gathered them, and placed them in his inner jacket pocket. Then, he lifted her into his arms. "Shut up." Logan's voice was low and commanding. He looked at Petra, his eyes filled with intense coldness. "I know you've been involved in gray market dealings with those shady people." Logan's voice was like a cold verdict, silencing everyone present, including Petra. "If you don't want to go to jail, behave yourself." Petra's crying instantly stopped, her face pale. Logan said no more. Carrying the unconscious Serafina, he strode out of the club. He didn't hand her over to his assistant, Gideon. Instead, he drove himself, speeding, and took her to the nearest hospital emergency room. During the long wait, the doctor diagnosed alcohol poisoning, requiring immediate treatment. Logan sat outside the emergency room, his elbows on his knees, hands clasped, watching the red light. He stayed up all night. His chest was filled with anger, pain, and an indescribable panic. She would go to such lengths for a dead object. Only when the doctor reported that her condition was stable the next morning did he wearily stand up. He assigned Serafina's follow-up care to Gideon, who had been waiting nearby. "Don't tell her I was here. Let her think you brought her." Logan's voice returned to its usual coldness and detachment, but the bloodshot eyes betrayed his inner turmoil. At 4 a.m, the red light in the emergency room went out. The doctor nodded to Logan, who was waiting outside the door, and gave a brief report: alcohol poisoning. "Her stomach has been pumped. She's stable but needs rest." Logan leaned tiredly against the wall, having been up all night, his eyes bloodshot. He pushed open the door to the hospital room, looking at the pale, quiet Serafina on the bed, her tightly furrowed brows finally relaxed. He walked to the bedside and gently smoothed the hair from her forehead, a gesture so soft he didn't even notice it himself. Logan knew that his defense of her in front of Petra last night, and his action of bringing her to the hospital, had completely shattered the money-for-service balance between them. If she woke up and found out it was him, given her acute awareness and pride, she would inevitably assume he was developing real feelings and would immediately draw a line. He couldn't let her leave. Not yet. He stepped out of the room and gave a solemn instruction to his assistant, Gideon, who had waited all night in the hallway: "You stay here. Tell her you were the one who brought her. Remember, I was never here." "Yes, Mr. Logan," Gideon bowed and replied. Logan drove away, locking all his worries and fatigue behind a cold mask. He knew he had to deal with the pressure of the arranged marriage from the corporation and his family first. In the early morning, Serafina woke up to the pungent smell of disinfectant. The severe hangover gave her a pounding headache, and her mind was still in a fog. She slowly opened her eyes. Sitting by the bed was Gideon, looking perfectly composed. "Miss Serafina, you're awake." Gideon greeted her politely and professionally. She asked hoarsely, "How did I get here?" "You passed out at Miss Petra's party last night. Mr. Logan was busy with his affairs, so he ordered me to bring you to the hospital." Gideon's answer was flawless, completely erasing the sleepless CEO from her world. Serafina lowered her eyelids, a wave of bitterness washing over her. She thought the entire fiasco had definitively ended her relationship with Logan, and she expected to wake up to abandonment and a reckoning. Instead, he had merely sent an assistant to handle the cleanup, not even bothering to give her an explanation or a reprimand. The value of a substitute was nothing more than this. A hint of gratitude welled up for Gideon: at least the assistant had considered her dignity. Just then, the LCD television on the hospital room wall was broadcasting the morning news. A striking headline immediately caught her eye: "Mogul Logan's engagement imminent, 2 major families unite for power." The news detailed the identity of the fiancé, the interlocking family interests, and the elders' expectations for the marriage. Serafina's heart felt abruptly squeezed, followed by irrational clarity. The 3 years were up. The news of the engagement was the death knell announcing the end. It was time for the substitute she played to make a dignified exit. She had actively pursued him, and now she must actively leave, refusing to give the Logan family any chance to humiliate or settle accounts with her. Serafina stood in the walk-in closet. The air was thick with a blend of fir and cedar, Logan's unique scent. She moved calmly, transferring all the compensation she had never touched over the past 3 years into an encrypted account, and then began packing her personal belongings. She was determined, burning her bridges to return to the world that excluded him, the world belonging only to Caleb, her first love. She was dragging a precisely sized suitcase to the entrance hall when the front door was violently thrown open. Logan, carrying the crisp chill of the outdoors and the overwhelming pressure from the boardroom, immediately saw her suitcase and the calmly chilling sense of detachment on her face. "You dare to take one step?" Logan roared, striding forward. He snatched the suitcase and violently hurled it against the marble wall, where it hit with a deafening crash. Then, he pinned her against the wall, his tall frame completely trapping her, his eyes blazing with the fury of betrayal. "I'm asking you, what is the meaning of this?" His voice was low and extremely dangerous. Serafina, however, was exceptionally calm. She met his gaze without flinching, as if looking at someone who was about to become an outsider. "Logan," her voice was devoid of any warmth, "the engagement news is public. You are about to marry a fiancé from a matching family. I don't want to hold you up, and I certainly don't want to be a nuisance before your wedding. It's time for me to make my exit." "Exit?" Logan laughed bitterly, his eyes full of sarcasm and hurt. You think I care about an arrangement? You think all I cared about was the obedience you acted out for 3 years? He clenched his fists, the terrifying cracking sound of knuckles chilling the air. His rage was at its peak. The calmer she was, the more humiliated he felt. Who said I agreed to the engagement? Logan shouted, the question laced with indignation and helplessness. He abruptly spun around and charged up the stairs with a venting velocity. He did not look at her again, fearful of doing something even more out of control. The living room returned to a deadly silence, broken only by Serafina's heavy breathing. She thought the entire farce was over. However, a few minutes later, it wasn't Logan who came downstairs, but the breathless assistant, Gideon. Gideon was carrying a large wooden box. The box was heavy, antique, and smelled faintly of dust. He set the box down and then produced a delicate velvet case from behind his back. Miss Serafina, this is from Mr. Logan. Gideon's tone was complex, tinged with an incomprehensible admiration. Confused, Serafina opened the wooden box. The sight before her instantly shattered all her reason and composure. Inside the box were all of Caleb's records, released, unreleased, and even all the limited run recordings, all the rare, out-of-print albums. They were meticulously organized and perfectly preserved in custom-made compartments, like a private music archive. Serafina trembled, her eyes immediately welling up. She had treated Logan as Caleb's substitute, craving his appearance, yet Logan had gone to great lengths to recover every sound Caleb had left behind for her. Even more shocking was the contents of the velvet case. Gideon gently opened it. The vinyl record that Petra had broken at the party had been meticulously glued back together by a restoration expert. Though crisscrossed with cracks, it was presented to her intact. This profound gesture, which transcended money and transaction, thoroughly disoriented Serafina. She had viewed him as a stand-in, yet he had done something so moving for her. She realized he had developed genuine feelings for her long ago, and these records were not payment but an invisible chain meant to bind her to him. For this debt of gratitude and these records, every trace Caleb had left, she could not simply walk away. To do so would make her appear even more contemptible than the most greedy person. She slowly closed the velvet case, suppressing all the pain and complexity in her heart. The gentle, compliant mask reappeared on her face. She pushed the suitcase back into the storage room, deciding to stay for the time being. She would continue to play the perfect mistress, feigning tenderness, to repay this profound debt of kindness until the day Logan truly married someone else. After accepting the records, Serafina fulfilled her promise, she stayed. But her continued presence came with a new, suffocating posture. She became extremely submissive and considerate. She no longer had the slight, deliberate coyness or demanding nature of the past 3 years. She asked for no gifts and expressed no emotions. She was like the perfect partner, selfless, desireless, and asking for nothing, as if her entire value was concentrated on caring for Logan's life. In the morning, she would prepare his favorite black coffee in advance, at precisely the right temperature. In the evening, she would wait quietly outside his study, merely to hand him a thin cashmere throw before silently withdrawing. Her tenderness was impeccable, yet she felt as distant as if separated by a pane of glass. This transformation made Logan intensely uncomfortable. He sat at the massive dining table, watching her quietly serve his food. That attitude of repayment lay between them like a cold knife. He didn't want a flawless servant, he wanted the Serafina who would flirt with him for money. The one whose eyes would light up because she spotted a necklace she wanted. That greed, at least, was vibrant and real. Why are you so quiet lately? Logan finally put down his knife and fork, his voice filled with suppressed irritation. Serafina looked up, her eyes showing the deliberate compliance she was performing. You don't like it? I thought this would make things easier for you. Easier? Logan swallowed, his tone laced with sarcasm. This isn't easier, it's detachment. Do you think you can use this approach to repay the debt those records created? He saw right through her, causing Serafina's face to instantly go pale. He was too perceptive, he had exposed all her pretense in one sentence. Logan stood up, not looking at her again. He was now even more certain that those vinyl records held an immense, non-monetary significance for her. She was willing to pay for them with 3 years of pretense and all her self-respect. Deep within this woman, a huge secret must be hidden, one even he could not touch. This feeling of being isolated from her secret pushed his displeasure to its peak. Half an hour later, Logan arrived at the family estate. He knew today would be an unavoidable war. In the family meeting room, smoke hung in the air, and the atmosphere was tense. Logan's father and grandfather sat at the head of the table, their faces grim. "You must give us an answer about the engagement." His grandfather's voice carried an unquestionable authority. "Logan, don't forget that everything you have today was given to you by this family." Logan didn't even glance at the engagement agreement. His long fingers tapped a steady rhythm on the table. A slight curl of disdain touched his lips as he spoke bluntly, "I am the CEO of this group. No one dictates my actions." Arrogance. His father slammed the table. "Do you really think you built this from the ground up? Your elders handed it to you. Don't forget what keeps that woman in your bed." Logan's eyes instantly turned frigid, like two sharp blades cutting into everyone present. He sneered, his tone conveying absolute dominance, his words cutting deep. "Hand it to me? If I hadn't taken over the failing mess you mismanaged 4 years ago, what would be in front of you right now wouldn't be an engagement agreement, it would be the bank's debt liquidation notice." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across his grandfather, his voice growing deeper. "I took over a collection of debt-ridden shells. I spent 4 years turning it into an empire. You didn't give me a favor, you gave me a debt. And now you want to use an arranged marriage to consolidate the stability I bought with my own blood and sweat." His words left all the elders frozen in place. They knew Logan was speaking the truth, yet no one dared to challenge his absolute authority. Logan produced the ultimate trump card he had prepared long ago. He threw a thin manila envelope onto the table with a sharp thwack. As for the engagement, Logan's gaze shifted toward the doorway. Though Petra wasn't there, he knew she was downstairs. "You value the family's only other heir highly, don't you?" He pointed to the envelope, a cruel smile on his face. Inside are the complete chains of evidence proving Petra's involvement in gray market transactions and tax evasion over the past 6 months. The evidence is conclusive, enough to send her to prison for 10 years. He looked at his ashen-faced father and grandfather, his tone like a final verdict. "If you dare to pressure me into this marriage again, or try to influence my private life in any way, I will hand this over to the police." He leaned forward, bracing his hands on the table, exuding the absolute pressure of a dominant figure. "She is the only other child in your family besides me. If you don't want her in jail, you'll be compliant." With that, Logan didn't even wait for their response. He turned and swept out of the room. An hour later, Gideon returned home and briefly reported the battle from the meeting to Serafina. As Serafina listened to Gideon recount how Logan single-handedly defied the entire family, exposed corporate secrets, and delivered that final, lethal threat, sending Petra to jail, she was more shaken than ever before. She had always seen Logan as a lucky socialite, a stand-in with a handsome face. But now, she saw not a substitute, but a ruthless, powerful, and politically astute CEO who would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. He was willing to turn against his entire family and push their only other heir to the brink to enforce his will. Serafina realized that beneath her cold pretense, Logan had endured immense pressure for her sake, using his darkest, most formidable power to gain control. Under his cold exterior was a side far more powerful and genuine than she had imagined. The block of ice in her heart, frozen for Caleb for 3 years, finally developed a subtle, imperceptible crack. Since Serafina stayed, her movements had become mysteriously regular. She was no longer the canary who simply waited for Logan's summons in the mansion. Instead, she would secretly leave the house once a week. Her reasons were always vague, but each time she returned, the suppressed tranquility in her eyes was replaced by a deeper melancholy. Logan was fully aware of this. He knew her actions must be connected to the story behind those records. As a high-powered CEO, a single order was all it would take to lay all of Serafina's secrets open before him like clear glass. But every time he was about to dial Gideon's number, he would force himself to stop. He loved her, even if that love was built on a monumental lie. He didn't want to break the seemingly stable balance between them, nor did he want to shame her by snooping. He wanted her to tell him herself. That was his last ounce of respect for the relationship. However, that self-restraint and respect were utterly shattered one afternoon by an unexpected phone call. "Mr. Logan, it's terrible. Miss Serafina has collapsed." Gideon's voice was filled with unprecedented panic. "Where?" Logan sprang from his chair, slamming the files in his hand onto the conference table, startling the directors present. At the private cemetery in the north suburbs," Gideon stammered in reply. "The cemetery?" Logan's mind instantly went blank. Serafina's parents had died years ago in an accident, and their ashes were interred in their distant hometown, a fact he had confirmed 3 years prior. She had no relatives in this city. Who was she visiting at the cemetery? That location was like a sharp dagger, cutting through the last defense in Logan's heart against the secret. Her obsession with the records, her detachment from him, her weekly disappearances, everything pointed to a truth he could no longer tolerate. Logan rushed to the hospital emergency room only to see Serafina lying there pale, still unconscious. Who was she visiting there? Logan asked the cold question to Gideon, who was standing beside him. I only know the deceased's name is Caleb, a musician. As for the rest, I didn't dare investigate further, Gideon replied tremulously. Logan's pupils constricted. Caleb? The image of the restored vinyl record instantly magnified in his mind. He couldn't stand any indirect descriptions. He needed to see it for himself, to confirm the truth that was unsettling his soul. He didn't wait any longer. He turned, commanding the driver in a cold voice to reverse the car, go to the North Suburbs Cemetery. Find Caleb's gravestone. His voice carried a broken finality. Night fell. The cold wind howled through the North Suburbs Cemetery, swirling dry leaves. Logan finally found the grave surrounded by white roses. He approached with an almost uncontrollable tremor, his gaze falling upon the black and white photograph on the tombstone. The person in the photo had youthful features, a gentle smile on his lips, and clear eyes like morning dew. He was none other than the acclaimed musical genius, Caleb. Logan quickly scanned the biography. Caleb grew up in the same city as Serafina, attended the same school, and was an emerging talent. When his gaze returned to the photograph, a shock of cold electricity pierced his heart. That young face had a 6 or 7 point resemblance to him, Logan. The similarity was stark and blinding. All the clues converged into one excruciating truth at that moment: Serafina's passionate pursuit. 3 years of nameless companionship, her gentle compliance with him, it was all because he was the perfect replacement for a man who had passed away. He was not Serafina's salvation, he was merely Caleb's shadow left in the world. He suddenly understood the fervor and desperation in her eyes at the auction. He understood why she would accept humiliation for the sake of the record. The only reason she had stayed was not out of love for him, but because he had given her the sound that belonged to Caleb. The pain and humiliation made Logan nearly unable to stand. He leaned down, looking at the face that resembled his own, and closed his eyes in agony. He was the CEO of a major corporation, a titan of industry, yet in love, he had been utterly defeated by a cold phantom. His agonizing tears finally rolled down, falling onto the cold stone surface of the tombstone. He had fallen in love with her, but her heart had never opened to him. When Serafina opened her eyes again, the smell of disinfectant stung her nostrils. Her physical weakness was secondary, what truly exhausted her was the shattered nightmare. A wave of intense self-mockery washed over her. The only thing her 3 years of pretense had bought her was the status of a substitute, and the thing she truly wanted, Caleb's sound, had almost been lost forever. She scanned the room but didn't see Logan. Only Gideon was sitting in the corner, nodding off from exhaustion. She felt a sigh of relief in her heart. This at least confirmed her suspicion. Logan considered her unworthy of his time, delegating the mess to his assistant. She's awake. Gideon woke up at her movement and immediately stood up. Serafina asked hoarsely, What happened to me? Alcohol poisoning, compounded by emotional shock, Gideon answered cautiously, but his eyes held a complex look she had never seen before. She didn't ask further, simply forcing herself to sit up. She knew the time was now. She had already received the debt of gratitude Logan had purchased with $5 million and the pile of precious records. If she didn't leave now, once Logan grew tired of her repayment tenderness, she would never be able to pull away. Her mindset was incredibly calm. Like performing a delicate surgery, she had to find a perfect opportunity to completely disappear from Logan's world without seeming ungrateful. Her world now consisted only of the sounds Caleb had left behind. Meanwhile, Logan was still sitting in the freezing cold cemetery. The black and white photo on the tombstone seemed to wear a mocking smile, reminding him that he was nothing more than a clumsy substitute. He clearly remembered Serafina's intense excitement when she first appeared before him. It wasn't love for him, but an outlet for her yearning for Caleb. He hated that he resembled another man, and he hated himself for making the childish move of giving the record to Petra out of jealousy for a dead man. More painfully, he finally understood why Serafina had been so compliant after receiving the records. It wasn't love, it was a heavy debt of gratitude. That pile of vinyl records wasn't his means to keep her, it was the shackles that bound her. He recalled her determined intent to leave before she received the records, and the forced, thoughtful compliance after she had them. He realized she didn't want to stay at all. It was Caleb's legacy that made it impossible for her to simply walk away. True love is freedom. This thought arose from his deepest pain. He couldn't let her continue to waste her life for a shadow, for a posture of repayment. He couldn't use Caleb's legacy to bind the person Caleb loved most. He had to sever this twisted dependency and give her a definitive chance to leave. Logan sat in the graveyard until the sky was completely dark and the cold had seeped into his bones. His eyes were dry, but his gaze was unusually resolute. He picked up his phone, his voice eerily calm. "Gideon, go to the hospital. Tell the doctor that once Serafina wakes up, they are not to contact me again." He then dialed another number, the internal line leading directly to the hospital room. "Is this Miss Serafina?" Serafina's cautious voice came through the phone. "It is." "Serafina." Logan called her name softly. There was none of his usual dominance or anger in his voice, only a quiet distance. "I'm glad you're awake. It's time for you to leave." Serafina's hand tightened sharply around the receiver. She expected him to question, to settle accounts, to rage, but she never expected him to so calmly dismiss her. "My things?" she asked, forcing a calm tone. "You can take all the records, including everything you have gained from me over the past 3 years. Everything is yours," Logan stated unequivocally, his tone carrying an indisputable finality. "I want nothing. You are free." The call was disconnected. Logan leaned back against the cold tombstone, the night wind blowing across his cheek. He let go in the most brutal way, reserving all the pain and heartbreak for himself. He knew that from this moment on, she would completely vanish from his world. The phone call was too sudden. Logan's cold and firm "you are free" felt like a sentence, causing Serafina's fingers to whiten around the receiver. She had expected to face his anger, his final reckoning, or even his condescending pity when she woke up. She had rehearsed countless exit scenarios, all carrying a hint of liberation. But when true freedom arrived, it was delivered by him with a complete severing, void of anger, only detachment. This calmness unnerved her more than any scolding could. She put down the phone, about to call Gideon to process her discharge, when the hospital room door opened. Logan walked in. He was in a sharp suit, his posture straight, but he radiated an aura of extreme coldness. His eyes were like distant icebergs, calm, yet unfathomable. He seemed no longer the man who would secretly watch over her when she had a fever, but had reverted to the arrogant, unfeeling mogul of 3 years ago. Only he knew that his clenched fists and rigid back were proof of his agony. Though he had ended things over the phone, he still needed to see her one last time. "You're awake." Logan stopped by the bedside, his tone as flat as if discussing a terminated business contract. "Yes." Serafina forced herself to remain steady. Recalling the freedom he had given her on the phone, she decided to make a clean break. "Since I'm all right, I plan to be discharged today. No need to trouble you." Logan gave a slight nod, his face expressionless. "Good. As I said on the phone, you don't need to return." He took out a bank card and a legal document from his inner jacket pocket, his movements meticulous, as if completing a routine formality. "This is the compensation you've earned for the past 3 years. Additionally, this document is the deed of gift for all the records." Logan placed the items on the bedside table, his voice devoid of pity or nostalgia, only cold rationality. "You can leave. I no longer require you to stay, and you can take all the records with you. Your relationship with me ends here." He had completely severed all ties, ruthlessly pushing the final gift of freedom toward her. Serafina expected to feel liberated, to feel a sense of relief. After all, she had successfully escaped with Caleb's entire legacy, her mission was accomplished. However, the emotion that surged within her was not lightness, but an indescribable shock and sting. She thought his dominance would free her, making her flee as if escaping shackles. Instead, his release felt like a cold silver needle suddenly plunging into the deepest part of her heart. She abruptly realized she had become accustomed to pretending beside him, accustomed to his superiority, and even accustomed to him being Caleb's only shadow. Now, he had personally stripped away this relationship, taking away her only excuse and support. This freedom was so heavy it suffocated her. Serafina forcibly suppressed the surging emotions in her eyes. She couldn't let him see her waver. She reached out and took the bank card, ignoring the record's deed of gift. "Fine." Her voice was calm and detached, perfectly mirroring Logan's coldness. She looked up at the man she had pretended to love for 3 years, her eyes chillingly composed. "Thank you for the past 3 years." With a formal, relationship-severing farewell, she announced the end of the substitute relationship. Logan's body visibly stiffened, but he quickly regained his composure. He didn't say another word, only looking deeply at her once, his gaze filled with extreme forbearance and self-punishment. Then, he turned and left the hospital room. Serafina listened to the door close, finally unable to sustain herself, and slumped back against the headboard. She curled up in the blanket. The sudden emptiness in her chest was more intense than the after effects of the alcohol poisoning. Early the next morning, Gideon arrived at the hospital as instructed by Logan, ready to handle Serafina's clearance and discharge procedures. She left last night, the nurse said, causing Gideon to pause for a moment before he immediately felt relieved. Good, she was gone, and everyone's troubles were over. However, while processing the hospitalization records, the doctor frowned and called him back. Miss Serafina's emotional fluctuations are very detrimental to her health and the fetus, the doctor calmly informed him. She needs rest, and Mr. Logan, as the father of the child, must already be aware of this news, right? Gideon's world instantly crumbled. He stood rigid in place, barely able to process the earth-shattering news. Fetus? Pregnant? The doctor looked at him in surprise. Then explained in detail, yes, that's the real reason she fainted. Tests show she is approximately 2 months pregnant. Please notify the child's father immediately. The emotional and alcohol damage in the early stages of pregnancy must be taken seriously. Gideon felt as if he had been struck by lightning. He forgot to thank the doctor and rushed out of the hospital in a daze, immediately reporting the news to Logan, who was handling a crisis at the company. The moment Logan received Gideon's call, he was in his penthouse office listening to a report on an important acquisition. When he heard the words pregnant, his pen clattered onto the expensive carpet with a jarring sound. All his reason, composure, and arrogance vanished instantly. He was no longer the CEO of the corporation but a lover consumed by worry and extreme panic. Logan shot up from his chair, pushing aside the report in front of him, his voice trembling uncontrollably. Are you sure? The fetus, how far along? After receiving the definite answer, his heart felt fiercely squeezed by an invisible hand. She left last night in that condition. Did she know about the pregnancy? Did she leave because of it? Was she planning to terminate the pregnancy, or raise the child alone? Regardless of the choice, Serafina would face a huge burden and irreparable harm. He had to intervene. He had to take responsibility. He had to protect her. Immediately use every resource to find Serafina's whereabouts. She cannot leave. Logan roared into the phone, his voice filled with unprecedented despair and panic. He no longer cared about business meetings, family threats, or the lie of the substitute. After utilizing all the family's private resources, Logan finally located Serafina at a corner of the airport at 10 in the morning. She was preparing to board a flight to an unknown small city in the south. She wore a beige trench coat and dragged the simple suitcase, looking exceptionally frail, her back view lonely and resolute. She tightly clutched the repaired vinyl record, as if it were her only solace. Logan rushed through the crowd, his heart pounding. She was all he could see. He quickly walked behind her, his voice husky and urgent. Serafina. Serafina spun around. When she saw Logan standing before her, her eyes flashed with shock, panic, and an unspeakable despair. Logan looked at her pale face and the treasured, repaired record she tightly held. All the speeches he had prepared in his chest, all the rational statements about how whether you keep the child or not, I will bear the cost and care for you, completely collapsed at that moment. He rushed toward her, reaching out, yet not daring to touch her. His eyes were filled with pain, sincerity, and pleading, abandoning all the dignity of the mogul. Logan asked, his voice raw, with a humility he had never shown before, every word deliberate, if that person is already a memory that can't return, Serafina. His gaze was fiercely locked on her. Finally, his voice broke with a tearful catch, speaking the deepest desire of his heart. Could you consider me? Amidst the reverberation of Logan's humble and sincere confession, Serafina's pretense and composure completely shattered. She looked at the man before her, who had cast aside all his pride, his CEO status, and even his resentment toward the truth of her using him as a substitute. He was in pain, sincere, and his eyes were full of pleading. She realized that what he had sacrificed for her was far more than an arranged marriage, it was the entirety of his dignity as Logan. Her tears, suppressed for 3 years, could no longer be held back and finally broke free. Choking back sobs, she asked the question closest to her heart, the most crucial one, you're not getting married? If he was only taking responsibility for the child, she would never stay. Seeing her tears, Logan's heart ached. He quickly stepped forward and pulled her into a tight embrace, his action conveying the ecstasy of recovery and extreme cherish. He promised her firmly, his voice husky against her ear, "I never planned to marry anyone else." He emphasized the words with a hint of self-deprecating honesty. "Before I met you, I didn't even want to get married in this life. Serafina, I fell in love with you long ago. I let you go because I wanted to give you true freedom, not for an engagement." In his solid embrace, Serafina felt his real body heat and his frantic heartbeat. She lifted her head from his chest, her eyes determined as she told him her greatest concern. "I wasn't planning on getting an abortion." Upon hearing this, Logan's previously tense body instantly relaxed, erupting in an outburst of joy. He cupped her cheeks, wanting to kiss her, yet holding back with cautious restraint. However, the thought of her using him as a substitute, and his jealousy toward Caleb, still tainted his joy with a hint of bitterness and anxiety. He gently stroked her cheek, his voice as soft as fragile glass. "It's okay, it doesn't matter," he said with a mix of self-comfort and forbearance. He looked down at the dearly held record in Serafina's arms. "After all, the child carries my genes, so he might look a little like Caleb too. I will raise him, and I will treat him as our shared." Before he could finish his sentence, Serafina interrupted him. Her eyes were glistening with tears, yet she did not hesitate, looking directly at him and correcting all his anxieties and assumptions with absolute certainty. "It's not because of anyone else, Logan." She took a deep breath. Leaving 3 years of pretense and all her regrets for Caleb behind, bravely stepping toward their future. "It's because I fell in love with you too." That sentence, like a bolt of thunder, completely overwhelmed all of Logan's reason and pain. He froze, staring at her motionless, the shock in his eyes instantly transforming into an unbelievable, pure ecstasy. That joy surged uncontrollably like a volcanic eruption, carrying an overwhelming heat. "What did you say?" His voice was trembling, as if he couldn't believe his own ears. Serafina smiled, her face streaked with tears, and repeated, "I love you, Logan. This record is my most precious possession, not because it's Caleb's work, but because you went to such great lengths to repair it for me." No more words could express Logan's feelings at that moment. He let out a low growl, as if to merge her into his very bones, and lifted her tightly into his arms, spinning around madly in this airport corner filled with farewells and reunions. Suitcases, records, engagements, family, the substitute, everything was cast aside. The substitute game was completely over. The mutually shared love declared the ultimate victory.